Hello and welcome to the Sixers Talk podcast, brought to you proudly by Wilmington University. Amy Fadool and Noah Levick. Danny Pommel's is on vacation. He did not go anywhere warm or fun, I don't think. I think it's just a staycation, but he's off regardless. And we'll find out next week what he did with his vacation. It is freezing cold outside, so I hope it's at least warmer wherever he is, but I don't think it is. Noah, how are you holding up? Because this is about as cold as it's been in a year.
Yeah, when I hear vacation, I think maybe he would be fortunate enough to warm up a little. But yeah, it's been an adjustment. I'm trying to sort of figure out the necessary layering and all of that. So it is basketball season in full force weather-wise right now. Seriously.
Yes, it is. Speaking of, obviously, the Sixers going for, dare I say it, 2 in a row. I don't know. I know that they're a favorite. I think last I checked it was a 4.5 road favorite down in Charlotte. Charlotte is without LaMelo Ball, though they do have some other nice pieces that can score. They had a heartbreaking, very close loss. They've had a couple of those actually. The Hornets had this year. So it's a team that can score, certainly a team that can push the pace. So we'll see how the Sixers can do. But before we get to that, there's a little bit of housekeeping. Sixers signing a two-way player today. Noah, what can you tell us?
Yeah, they've signed Pete Nance, and to open up the two-way spot necessary, they've waived Lester Quinones, the 24-year-old shooting guard. So Pete Nance, famous family. His brother Larry Nance Jr. is a veteran player for the Hawks. His father beat out the great Julius Erving in the NBA's first slam dunk contest. Larry Nance Sr. Pete Nance appeared in 8 games for the Cavs last year. He's mostly been a G League guy, and he's a 6'10", sort of skilled big. He likes to stretch the floor and is a good passer, likes to get in the open floor. Obviously not a traditional big at that size, kind of a thinner frame. But I guess developmentally, the Sixers seem to feel that it makes sense right now to add a big in their system. And then there's also the short-term aspect here, as we'll get into. They are shorthanded right now when you're looking at their big man depth. Joel Embiid still sidelined, and now Andre Drummond out as well with a sprained ankle. So for the time being, I would expect Gershon Yabusele, Adem Bona, perhaps even KJ Martin to be the options Nick Nurse would turn to first when we're looking at big men. But Pete Nance is with the team, and another option that Nick Nurse could use in a spot where further misfortune or foul trouble or what have you hits in this little period coming up here.
Yeah, speaking of, after the win on Wednesday, Nick Nurse spoke about that. We saw Andre Drummond go down with that ankle injury. It's just one of those things that happens when, the guys are going after the ball right under the basket. He landed on a guy's foot and rolled his ankle and had to be helped off the court. And of course, Nick Nurse said exactly what everybody else was feeling, was like, of course, you get one guy back in PG and then you lose another one. And this time it's Andre Drummond. We've seen Gershon Yabusele fill in admirably in that 5 role. He actually started that game on Wednesday, had a great game, I thought. But he played the 4, and then Adem Bona, as you mentioned earlier, he came in and I thought played some really good minutes, some quality minutes. But now it looks like Andre Drummond's going to be sidelined for at least a game or two. So going forward, what would your lineup? Would you keep Gershon Yabusele in that 4 and then start Adem Bona, or would you move Gershon to the 5 and then have Caleb Martin, Paul George, Kelly Oubre, and Tyrese? What was your starting 5 look like?
I'm not too sure. It's also tough because Caleb Martin's been dealing with back soreness, missed the Detroit game. As of this afternoon, is questionable for the first leg of this back-to-back. But I think the Sixers have to manage that picture as well. I think for me, especially given how well he's played the last 2 games, give KJ Martin some minutes at center, kind of spell Yabusele there at times. But yeah, though I think the ultimate vision for Yabusele is that he's able to play power forward. The reality is they need him to eat up a lot of center minutes these days. And I was just looking at it the other day. He's played 77% of his minutes this year as a center. No one imagined that going in, but credit to him for how well he's adjusted to it. And I do think the more reps he gets there, you see he looks a little more comfortable defensively. And I think he's had some nice moments as well, both as a 5 and a 4, switching out to the perimeter and just kind of being as versatile as the Sixers need him to be in that spot. But yeah, I think a lot of it will also just hinge on whether Bona can continue to play well. He's only had 2 real opportunities thus far in a rotation sort of role, and he's been super high effort, hustled, real presence on both the offensive and defensive glass. And there are those little moments where he'll make a miscue, he'll set a movement screen, he'll look a little sure of what to do with the ball in a short roll. But I think for the most part, it's been a nice blend of just constant effort and some poise. Like he doesn't look like he's really panicked about the fact that he's thrown into action. He does look like he believes that he belongs and he wants to prove that he's deserving of continuing minutes. So yeah, for me, I think continue to start Yabusele at center for the time being, just given there's some comfort there. And then I think trust Adembona as your primary backup 5. See if he can sustain this. But yeah, I think regardless, KJ Martin's in a spot where he should be playing a lot of minutes in the near future, both at the 4 and perhaps at the 5 as well, just given the Sixers need to be more flexible than usual and are again dealing with an undermanned front court situation here.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up KJ Martin because we talked about him on pregame, and then obviously he rewarded us for the effort on postgame. He and Ricky Council, the last 2 games, albeit only one of them a win, but the last 2 games really providing that spark and that energy. And when we looked at that kind of, shorter, it seemed, as far as youth and energy goes, bench in the offseason, because yes, they signed guys like Eric Gordon and Reggie Jackson, but that was really more of solidifying backup point guards. As far as guys that you're like, all right, who can give us that boost? I didn't look at Eric Gordon or Reggie Jackson. You looked at guys like KJ Martin and Ricky Council IV. So I thought that they played, and Ricky Council is young. We know that. So is KJ Martin. KJ Martin's been in the league for since 2020. So this is his 5th year in the league, but he's only 23. He doesn't turn 24 until January. So he's a young guy. I talked to Mark Jackson about what part of his game reminds him of Kenyon Martin, and he said just the ferocity with which he obviously dunks, but also the energy he plays with physically. He's not going to remind you of Kenyon Martin as much. Kenyon Martin was a very big player, but it's interesting that he's given this opportunity. He's been able to kind of showcase what he can do. I said it on the show the other day. I'd pay to see him in the dunk contest. I think he's a high flyer, and I think he has a lot of balance when it comes to something like that. And I think the dunk contest has lost its luster for whatever reason. You could say it. If you're Brian Brennan, you're going to say it's because of LeBron James never doing it, but no one does it anymore. And I think that you should make it like a real prize and actually give the guy like a Mac McClung or a KJ Martin, to give them like $150,000 if they win that. And I think you'd see some really spectacular dunks. But it'll be interesting to see how they kind of piecemeal that front court. They'll have to go smaller, but that's just because you don't have Andre Drummond and Joel Embiid. I don't think it's going to be as detrimental. And I do think Adembona gives them something extra on the defensive kind of effort on that. He's been very good in rebounding, both offensive and defenses. His offense is, overall where you'd expect a guy like that, the second round pick, kind of where he was, more of that project offense, but I think he's blended in pretty well. And offensively, Gershon Yabusele has done everything and then some. I mean, he is their best statistical percentage-wise 3-point shooter on the team right now at over 40%. So he's been a real dream in that regard. So yes, they're shorthanded, but they still like their chances on the road. At least Vegas does. I like their chances on the road. I think at least the last 2 games, even though one of them only was a win, was winning basketball. I think that's been the difference. They hadn't been playing winning basketball. And I think that there's been a shift. And I think that they're trying to do it. And it could have been stemming from the team meeting. It could have been stemming from, the rhetoric we heard from Kelly Oubre and Paul George and Tyrese Maxey after the last couple of games, saying, we're all we got. Like this, we got to put our heads down and give everything that we can, because they know as well as anybody else the season is slipping away. You're looking at you're coming up on a quarter of the season done, and you have 4 wins, and you're thinking we're into December. Today's December 3rd. So it'll be interesting to see what they do on that front. One topic, and our producer Ben Barry brought this up, because I know we've talked about it when we try to kind of extrapolate where the Sixers are going to be. and think about the postseason, because the expectations were Eastern Conference Finals, if we're honest. I mean, you don't sign a guy like Paul George and give all these max contracts out and think, oh, I hope we're in the play-in tournament like last year. Last year, though, the 10 seed, which was the Atlanta Hawks, they won 36 games. They were the last team to make it. And I think it came down to one of the last couple of games for them. Right now, the Sixers would have to go 500 the rest of the way. I mean, you're looking at, 65 games to go? I like their chances if Joel Embiid is playing, but you wonder if this team can win 32 more games. It seems unfathomable to think about that when you've got guys like Tyrese Maxey, who I think is completely back from his injury, and you hope Paul George gets there soon. But that's where we're at. So Noah, it begs the question, can this team, we're dealing with all the injuries, and there are going to be more that crop up because that's just the nature of the beast, can this team win 30, well, let's say 33 more games and try to get into that 9 or 10 seed?
Yeah, I still would go with the yes on that one. I
Yeah.
think the top 6 spot looks a little more daunting. But yeah, I do think it's pretty safe to assume you're not going to need more than 36 or 37 wins to be a play-in team. And I think it's been legitimately encouraging that Nick Nurse has turned to more youthful rotations the last couple of games and has gotten great results. If we're talking about a turning point, I think this quite possibly could be one in that regard. We heard him say after the Houston game, older guys, veterans had gotten minutes, didn't produce. Now you need to look somewhere else, essentially. And I think Ricky Council has clearly regained some of the confidence that he lost early in this year. We heard him after the Rockets game talking about watching old clips of himself, watching film from his rookie year, and trying to remember what he's capable of and how he has to play, with such intensity and aggression. And this guy, when he's on his game, he plows down that court, he draws free throws, and he puts a lot of pressure on the opposition. And I think we've seen that version of Council these last 2 games. And in my opinion, he certainly has the athletic tools to sustain, that to some degree. And then with KJ Martin, I honestly thought he'd been pretty good for much of this year. And there were quite a few games where there was a case to include him when you were looking for a little change in momentum, where you were looking for someone who would give you some, solid, versatile defense. So I think he's been a bright spot overall. I think the one slight disappointment is he's remained pretty reluctant to shoot 3-pointers, despite the Sixers internally being really optimistic about his shooting development. I think he continues to look pretty good when he puts up jumpers, but the thing he trusts most in his game is driving hard downhill, being a menace in the open floor. That putback dunk last game was awesome and is the kind of thing you can do consistently. So yeah, I think those are the sort of guys who can help you string together some shorthanded wins and give you some more optimism just in a general sense that you're capable of that. And then, yeah, the Sixers, I think, ultimately will need some availability from the 3 All-Stars, whatever piecing that together looks like. But, yeah, trying to do the big picture projections. We know it's not easy. We know the Sixers have severely underwhelmed to this point, but I would still be a bit surprised, I'll say, if they were to entirely miss out on the play-in picture is my current read on it.
Yeah, it's funny. I was on, I guess it was 2 Sundays ago. Sixers had a game. The Eagles were playing, and so some of our betting guys were in, like Brad Feinberg, and he was like, "They're going to make the playoffs, right?" And our Sixers producer Brian Brennan was like, he and I looked at each other like, "I get it from the outside. If you're not in it, it does look pretty bleak, but when you look at how the East is going to shake out, it just seems really improbable for them, and the way the play-in tournament is set up, improbable for them to miss out on any portion of it. Whether it's the 9-10 game, and if you say that it's the playoffs, maybe you don't think if you're in the first 4, if you're in the NCAA tournament. It depends on how you look at it, but you're definitely going to be playing. Sixers will be playing postseason basketball, whether it's 1 game or a couple games. I think that's. I think even if they don't get much from the big 3 altogether, I think they should be able to back their way into with enough talent on the rest of their roster into 32 more games, 32 more wins over the next 60 plus. 40 wins, I think, is probably out of the question, because even then that would be maybe a 6-7, which is pretty crazy to think about. The East is down. That's the one good thing. There's two teams that are at the top with the Cavs and the Celtics, and everybody else is kind of just fighting in that 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 now spot. But it'll be something interesting to watch on that front, because in the beginning of the year, I think we thought, oh yeah, no, they'll figure it out. And then now when you're 20 plus games in, you're thinking, at what point are you going to figure it out? Because there's only 82 of these things. All right, let's take a quick timeout so we can pay some bills, as Daniel Pommel's likes to say. Of course, this Sixers Talk podcast is brought to you by Wilmington University. Get to know Wilmington University at its virtual open house on Wednesday, December 4th. That is tomorrow or today, depending on when you're listening to this. Details at wilmu.edu/open house. All right, there's a couple other things that we can get to, and I do want to get to the game tonight and then back home, because it's a weird back-to-back. Because it's a back-to-back game. It's tonight and then tomorrow at home against the Magic, and then it's also at home against the Magic on Wednesday. And then there's this craziness of this huge gap. So I'm going to get Noah's thoughts on that in a second. But the other topic I want to make sure we get to, because I love when people make these lists for anything, whether it's top 25 under 25 or top 75 all time, and you don't have a couple of guys on there, or if it's the greatest quarterbacks of all time and people, they rank John Elway 5th or something crazy. The crazy things. I love when people make lists, because you always wonder who's making the list. And is it who are you asking? So ESPN had a top 25 under 25. Tyrese Maxey comes in at 7, and I'll tell you who's ranked above him. I only have a problem with one guy ranked above him. Victor Wembanyama's 1, Anthony Edwards is 2, Paolo Banchero is 3, Franz Wagner is 4, Chet Holmgren is 5, and Tyrese Haliburton is 6. Beyond that, there's some good players. Evan Mobley's, I think, a little too high, but he's a good player. Jalen Williams, who I think is tremendous. Alperen Sengun, we saw up close. They shut him down. Scotty Barnes, too high for me. LaMelo Ball, 12. Cade Cunningham. And it goes on and on. Zion Williamson is down there. When he plays, he's great, but the problem is he doesn't always play. So Tyrese Maxey, 7. First name that jumps out to me is, why is this guy ranked over him? Is not Tyrese Haliburton, though I think that there's a case there, is Chet Holmgren. And that's only because I feel like we've seen so little of Chet Holmgren. I know he's supposed to be, all world. And I think when I've seen glimpses of it, especially in the OKC system, I think, wow, that guy's really could be a special player. And then as soon as I pull up either highlights or the box score, I look and he didn't play. So for me, that's a big, he would be a TBD on that. And I would rank, I know Victor Wembanyama was ridiculous, but I would probably rank Anthony Edwards 1 and then Wembanyama 2, because Anthony Edwards has shown me a little bit more. But Wembanyama is an absolute, he's an alien. That's why they call him. All right. So when you look at that list, what stands out to you? And do you think that's where Maxey should be ranked 7?
Yeah, I think there's a good case that he should be above Tyrese Haliburton.
Mm-hmm.
I guess a lot of it just hinges on how much you believe Tyrese Haliburton's eventually going to get back to being a high-level shooter, but it's been a long time now, and he really just has fundamentally not seemed to be the same player since his hamstring injury in the middle of last year. The shooting percentages over a pretty extended stretch at this point are subpar, and we know he's a brilliant facilitator, great open floor playmaker, capable of, leading his team well and having great vision and court generalship and all of that. But like for me, he needs the 3-point shooting to be there at a higher level than it's been for an extended period now. So Tyrese Maxey, of course, hasn't shown a ton this season. He's had his own injury absence, and also still below his career norms with the 3-point shooting. But I think there's a good case that you could put Tyrese Maxey above Haliburton. I think part of that is Maxey, the all-world speed and explosiveness is going to be there. And to me, that just feels like something he can often lean on to produce, even when the jump shot is not dropping. Of course, he's nowhere near Tyrese Haliburton with his passing ability yet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, an advantage for Haliburton in that department. I don't have a problem with Holmgren. I guess it all depends on how much you want to value future potential versus the present. But I think Chet Holmgren, in the vast majority of NBA seasons, would have been a clear rookie of the year. And he just so
Mm-hmm.
happened to be in the same class with Wemby. So, yeah, for me, it would be great if we had a little more evidence that Chet Holmgren was the real deal. But we have seen him look good in playoff basketball. And we have seen that the shot blocking and rim protection translates, in addition to there being a heck of a lot of offensive skill that should lead him to put up some pretty big NBA numbers, I think, over a long career, health permitting. So, yeah, for me, I did look first at the Tyrese's and think that was a natural area for debate. Um, yeah, and I think there are valid points to be made on both sides, but for me, it is significant that Tyrese Halliburton. It's been a long time
Mm-hmm.
since he was the player who could sort of do it all offensively. Right now, shooting is a real weakness in his game.
Yeah, that's such a good point because he has not gotten back to that form. You saw when he had that injury, and you just kept thinking, is it going to come back? Is it going to come back? Because he is a tremendous offensive player. His court vision really is the one that's going to put him over Tyrese Maxey in that regard. But to your point, Tyrese Maxey has much better shooting numbers, and his scoring is much higher, not just from outside, also inside with those inside runs. But I know you raised your eyebrows at my Anthony Edwards over Victor Wembanyama, and I think that I could probably say I'm fine with Wemby being up there. He's obviously I look forward to that game, but I look forward to the Ant Edwards game too. So
Yeah.
those are like 1 and 1A right there for me. Those are two dynamic players who couldn't be more different. Like what a world that's like you're trying to debate like who's the best 25 under 25, and you're thinking, oh, here's two options, and one of them is completely different from the other. They couldn't be more different.
Yeah, and you're looking at those are two number one draft picks. Most of these guys are lottery picks. I think we'd have to
Yeah.
go really.
Yeah,
I'm
Maxey's
looking.
the
He
only
might be
one
the only non-lottery
in
pick
the top
on here in the
10.
top 15 or something like that.
Yeah,
So Sixers indeed
good
got a
point.
gem in that regard. But yeah, for
Good
me,
point.
I don't want to be too prisoner of the moment with the Timberwolves having a disappointing start to the season. The Spurs probably outperforming most people's expectations. But I do think Wembanyama, like you see, there's so many ingredients that should lead
He's
this
ridiculous.
to just continued, improvement and continued dominance. And yeah, this is a guy who's putting up some big numbers in all departments now. He's racking up triple doubles, 40, 50-point
Mm.
games. Like there's no signs of stopping that train. So yeah, I think Anthony Edwards, like outstanding athlete, competitor, and yeah, the kind of guy that you just instinctively don't want to bet against. But I think I would be on the
Yeah.
Wembanyama number one island here, or perhaps not so much of an island. But yeah, I hear you, Anthony Edwards. He is a true superstar, and there are a lot of really really great young players in this league.
Mm-hmm.
I think Tyrese Maxey being a top 10 guy is nothing to scoff at. I mean, you name guys like Evan Mobley, Cade Cunningham. I mean, these are legit big time contributors for top teams in the league, and I do think the consensus right now is Tyrese Maxey is at least a little bit better than some of these players.
Yeah, Wemby's number one, and Maxey maybe will finally start getting some calls, but probably not. It's probably not how that's going to go. I think he got like one or two recently. So I got to talk to you about this schedule glitch because Mark Jackson, who played in the league obviously for a number of years, it's so funny. We have a text chain, and he'll ask a question on it or whatever, or we'll trade nonsense back and forth. He just cannot wrap his head around the fact that there's only like one or two games in this gap, and so we've tried to, and he knows why, but it's still, when you look at it, it's just so unusual because the way the NBA in season, the NBA Cup is now, they're not going to have, if you're not playing in the quarterfinals or semifinals or finals, if you're not playing in any round of it, officially, they don't want to go. So you're not going to play on the 14th and you're not going to play on the 17th because those are the two rounds of the semifinals and I guess the finals. So because of that, and then you have to leave space for the teams that didn't make it. So you have to kind of, shoehorn in those games, but there's only two games that you're gonna miss. So they have a game on December 8th. That's a solidified game. We know it's a game. They're playing the Bulls in Chicago. Great, good time. The next game on the schedule is the Hornets in here in Philadelphia on December 20th. So you have 2 games on either on December 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th. Like, that's insane. And I think it has to be either on the 12th or 13th for one of them, and the other one has to be on the 15th or 16th.
Right.
So you're going to have a game on the 8th and let's say the 13th. That's 5 days. And then you're going to have one on the 13th and then maybe on the 16th.
Mm-hmm.
And then you won't have a game again until the 20th.
Right.
How backloaded does the schedule have to be? We've already seen it be front-loaded a little bit with some back-to-backs. How backloaded is the schedule going to have to be because of that? Because you also have the All-Star break to get in.
Yeah, I feel like there surely was a way to
It wasn't like this last year, right? Like, I looked it up.
Oh, last year I want
It
to say
it was crazy, but not like 8 games or 8
Yeah,
days.
it was a similar concept. This might be, slightly more layoffs. It almost feels like a mini training camp in some regards. Obviously, if your team has some minor bumps and bruises that you're trying to repair, it's theoretically a good time to get all those things back on track. But yeah, I understand wanting to have focus on those NBA Cup games in Vegas. But yeah, I'm not sure it had to be this extreme with the schedule. We know it's a tough puzzle. There are so many variables that they try to account for. But for me, yeah, there surely was a way to avoid a team having like 3 or 4 days off, then 4 more days off, then 4 more days off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to kind of tighten that up a little bit surely was doable, but I think it's a situation where if you're the Sixers and you're now the norm is that you go into a game with 5 or 6 players on the injury report, try to just be thankful for it and say, all right, like this is our opportunity to actually get some rest, to actually enable the guys who are playing way more than they expected, like a Yabusele, in a spot closer to 100% health. And yeah, hopefully you use it well and tighten up on some of the details of your execution and your schemes and all of that. It's a little similar to what it's like with the playoffs and the teams that do earn a top 6 spot having to wait a while for the play-in to be completed. An emphasis that the NBA likes. They think it's good innovation to have the NBA Cup, to have the play-in tournament, etc. But there is some weirdness kind of as a byproduct of that I think teams have to think through their approach and be smart about maximizing the fact that they will not be making the trip to Vegas. So yeah, tonight's Sixers Hornets game, it's technically an NBA Cup game.
It is.
The court will be different, but I don't think either of these teams
anything.
are cup motivated whatsoever. They have both been eliminated. And the Sixers will be doing quite a bit of waiting and watching during that little 2-week period. So it's going to be interesting. And yeah, I believe, what we'll learn exactly the details of what those 2 games are once the, knockout rounds are all set for the Cup, which will be the case after tonight.
Yeah, so we'll find out either late tonight or tomorrow when they'll play and who they'll play, because they'll play other teams that are not in it. And I pulled up last year's schedule because I knew it was earlier. So they played the 29th of November, Friday 1st was the added game, and the 6th was the added game. So there was a 5-day gap in there, and then they played on the 8th, which was the other game they added. So they added the 6th and the 8th. But it was a smaller window, and maybe that was something that they thought it was too small. And so they didn't like it. But I'll have to look around the league to see if anybody else has this big of a gap. I'd imagine it's pretty common because, like we said, they don't like anybody. If there's one thing we learned about the league, they don't like when you mess with their marquee events. They want to be the only show in town. That's why they don't like when the stars rest the national TV games. And they don't like when you mess with their NBA tournament, in-season tournament, the NBA Cup, which is something new. And obviously I have to ask you this because we've argued this at work. I'm convinced that they made the Lakers hang that banner. Do you think that they made the Lakers hang that in-season tournament banner? They had to, right? Do you think the Lakers thought on their own, like, yeah, let's hang this up there with all our other banners?
That's a good question. They didn't seem to have much shame in hanging it, though. There was some
yes, that's true. Right.
Yeah,
I mean, there is pride in it. But it just seems funny for a Lakers team to be like, yeah, let's hang this banner. Like if I'm the Sixers, I'm absolutely hanging that thing up. It's
Right.
been a hot minute. There's no banners up there that are in the last 30 years.
My gut feel would be the Lakers did that of their own
All
volition,
right.
but I get your point. It's certainly an initiative the league wants to push very hard, and they want to convince everyone it's meaningful. I was honestly reminded of what the cup can mean just with the FA Cup, which of course the NBA has modeled this after in English
Mm-hmm.
football, and it is really freaking special. But I think a large part of what makes it so cool is you get teams well outside of the Premier League who
Right.
have the ability to pull off these incredible upsets that invigorate an entire town and just have such a March Madness sort of quality where no one saw this coming. They refer to it as giant killings in England. And in the NBA Cup, I do think there's legitimately a higher level of motivation. It's neat that you make this little trip to Vegas, but you're never going to get the equivalent of, a single A baseball team upsetting the Boston Celtics. That's just not how
Mm-hmm.
the NBA operates. So there are some limitations in how meaningful the NBA can make this event, but obviously they're trying their hardest to make this a yearly tradition and to have it be something that the fan base really fixates on. And I guess the schedule is an aspect of that.
All right. So I'll have to ask you this since you do know some soccer. Your biggest giant killer, your biggest upset in the FA Cup, because I remember watching one when I had not gotten here yet, where Chelsea lost, and I can't remember who they lost to, but it was somebody that was not a Premier League team, and they're on the outs. I'll have to look it up. But I remember like everybody went bananas, like everybody went crazy because it was like Chelsea was, they're at the top of the table, and here comes this random team that was not even on anybody's radar. But there have been some really good ones. I know. I remember Wrexham. That was years ago because I remember when they talked about it. I watched the Wrexham show or whatever. They talked about it. But what's the biggest one for you?
Yeah, I believe Wimbledon were not a top flight team, and they won it all back in the 80s. That's a really famous one.
There you
Lincoln
go.
City were at the time a non-league team in 2017. They made it all the way to the quarterfinals. In the third round draw this year, we've got Tamworth, another non-league side, drawn against Tottenham Hotspur.
Oh,
So that'll be very neat and
that's
exciting.
fun for someone to watch.
The team I support, Hull City, did make a run all the way to the final and took a stunning 2-0 lead over Arsenal early in the 2014 FA Cup final. Unfortunately, we lost that game in heartbreaking fashion
Wow.
in extra time, but we were on the
You're right there.
verge of sort of being in the history books. So yeah, there's kind of that potential every year for something stunning to happen. And I think just like the NBA, they can change the courts, but you're never going to get the equivalent
It's not going
of
to be the
this posh, prestigious team traveling to a team that's eighth in the pyramid and is essentially a village football ground, with none of the heated seats and amenities that they're used to. I think that environment contrast is a really cool element of the FA Cup. So, yeah, the NBA is doing the best they can, but it's hard. It's hard to force tradition. I think England, there's the little eccentricities that make it something people want to tune into, and yeah, the NBA is trying its hardest.
yeah. You don't think the Celtics are going to like Stockton Kings or anything like that? That would be more of what we're looking for. That's really what, if they're true, like maybe or true or parallel to the FA Cup. But I'm gonna have to look for that match again that's coming up. If you say that they're in the is it quarterfinals in the FA Cup right now?
So we're in the third round now. So
Third round.
Tamworth has made the third round, I believe, for the first time in its history.
Okay.
And as a team that's far down the pyramid, you don't start in the first round. You start in like the qualifying rounds. So you
Right.
have to win multiple
Well
matches
before.
even to make the first round proper. And they've done really well to reach this point. And I'm sure Tottenham will be favored to win by 4 or 5 goals, but maybe they won't. You never know.
Okay. Well, that's now on my radar. I just looked it up to see where it's going to be and when it's going to be, so I can put it on my radar because I love underdog stories. Because March Madness is a good parallel on that one. I love that kind of stuff. That's always good. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Sixers Talk podcast. The Sixers do play tonight. They also play tomorrow, so make sure you check out, obviously, pre- and post-game live, but also, more importantly, Noah's work on NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com. He always has wrap-up stories, sidebar stories, and everything you need to know about what happened in the games. And they go for 2 in a row. Could be for the first time this season. They will get 2 wins in a row. We've played that song 4 times. 4 on post-game. I sound like Gene Hackman, but that's how many passes I want, and that's how many times I played that song. All right, for Noah Levick, I'm Amy Fadool. Thanks for joining us here on Sixers Talk Podcast, brought to you by Wilmington University.